She changed, yeah. Yeah, no, fair question.
Just while we're on that theme then and out that in that neck of the woods, can we go to page 19 and do the Clifton submissions as well? Now this one really does relate much more specifically to a request around the extension of coastal protection to the access road to the Clifton camp, and particularly and quite specifically around council allowing a resource consent for that. As we did explain, yesterday, the original consent application was processed in 6 working days, but there'd been a lot of work gone into it to get it to allow that to happen. And one of the other key parties in all this is the Department of Conservation. And so it was beholden on the applicant, which was Hastings District Council on behalf of the Clifton Reserve Society, to work with the department to get their affected parties' approval. And I believe that they would need to do the same thing again. I think they've got a pretty good working relationship, and they could probably, get that done if the information's available. But I'll just reiterate what I said yesterday, that we will process any resource consent application that we receive in the building, and we'll do it as Councillor Scott has now described it as was best practice. So that's really where we're at from a staff perspective around this. We await an application.
Can I ask a question then of Mr Maxwell? The offline discussion that led to a 6-day turnaround consent, which is in anyone's language not too bad, not too shabby, for an extra 80 metres of a similar structure, which is my understanding of what was described to us as part of the process yesterday. Any offline discussions, or two parts, have any offline discussions been had, informally or anecdotally or whatever, or formally, I don't know, however you do that? And second question, do you see any issues with other parties to extend that piece of structure on a temporary basis?
So no, we haven't had any offline discussions as yet. Certainly in terms of best practice, it's what we would encourage before an application is lodged, so that we can get as much of the background work to a satisfactory standard done before the consent is lodged. So we certainly encourage that and facilitate that. And I guess ultimately who is deemed an affected party by extending it another 80 metres really depends on the effects of that and the assessment of that. If it moves a coastal erosion issue further along the beach and starts or potentially affects neighbouring properties further down the coast or further up the coast, they may well be considered affected and need to be brought into that process and their approval sought. So it really depends on the scale and the effect. And look, I don't know whether another 80 metres would trigger it into affecting more parties or not, because we haven't got that level of assessment in front of us to check. Thank
you. Any further questions there? Considering this is not really an effect on the annual plan itself, someone happy to move that there is no change to the annual plan? You happy to move that? Councillor Bevan, thank you. Councillor Pipe seconded that. Further discussion? Or as mover, sorry.
Yeah, well, I guess there's not much to say really. It seems to me that it doesn't impact on the annual plan, and I think what Councillor Scott had suggested for the previous resolution could also apply to this one. The existing wall is maybe 20 or 30 metres long, so it's a significant extension, and I guess we've got a bit more information now as to what the effects on the coast further up might be. So this is perhaps a somewhat more difficult one for us to deal with, but look, it's got to go through the process, and it's up to those people who are involved to put it there.
Seconder, you wish to speak? No, you did that very well. No other speakers. I'll put that motion. Then all those in favour, please say aye. Contrary, no. Carried. Council Investments on page 15.
Yeah.
Here's your big moment.
Well, no, just a few comments. I mean, it needs a potpourri of
of submissions covering council investments. The first one, and this is only one, I believe, covers the amalgamation. Why is this council looking at investing? Should it be deferred until after amalgamation? The comment that I've made here is we've got a couple of really big investments through Tanafa and Napier Gisborne Rail, which we've been focusing on. These need to be dealt with and the gains achieved as soon as practically possible. So that's just my comment on that. Another submitter wanted some clarification on one of our reserves, which I've provided there, which is the dividend equalisation reserve. And I've indicated whereabouts in the plan that a more comprehensive explanation can be found. Number 3 there were 2 or 3 submitters indicating that council should not invest in the Narora storage scheme. The comment here is that the council in this plan proposes to fund a feasibility study. They're not committing to the project until they have a look at the conclusions of that study. The 4th one covers the Whakatu Road Rail Hub. This submitter, I think there was only one, said that this initiative shouldn't be dropped, it should be in the plan. I've indicated there that when Napier Port believes the timing is right in the future, if it's right in the future, then they will come back if they need assistance, and council will look at it at that time. So it's not in the plan for now, or this annual plan for now.
Okay, so questions as relating to the annual plan, Councillor Byrne?
Thank you. Number 3, Paul, you say that the council has made an allowance to provide some funding for the commencement of a feasibility study. Can you put a figure on that?
Yeah, I think from memory, Councillor, it was 1.3 million, which of course includes all the staff time that will go into that.
Funding of a feasibility study?
Yes, it was resolved in one of our workshops for the annual plan. Did this council want to put aside money for a feasibility study for the Narora, and would this council carry it out, or HBRC? From recollection, I think this council felt that perhaps the council would carry out that study and not HBRC, but that's open for debate. But a provision was made for that.
Okay, I'm interested in Ian's view on this, but I would be very reluctant to spend that money when we're still quantifying both the demand and the supply side of water in the Hiratonga aquifer. We may find that we've wasted $1.3 million if we find we don't actually have a shortage of water, and I think we need to do some more work on what's currently available before we start developing plans for storage, because I'm not convinced that's necessarily where we need to go with this.
I'm not sure I can add much more to that discussion other than to suggest that what we will be able to bring to the table is a tool to assess effects of limit setting in those catchments, which will give an indication as to reliability of supply for irrigators. And ultimately that'll drive the discussion as to whether storage is required or not. It really depends on where your limits are set. You could have quite permissive limits and not have an issue, or quite restrictive limits and create an issue that needs addressing some other way. So, I mean, I understand that there is some risk, but it really depends on where your limits end up sitting, which is sitting in that tank process.
So wouldn't we want to go through that process first before we decide we need to go into a feasibility phase?
Well, I guess that's a decision for council to make in terms of how quickly it wants to react to that, because those limits may come into play pretty quickly.
I can answer that. I think probably mark it up, but I'll have a go. The part of a feasibility study obviously is it feasible to actually do a storage project, and part of that study would be obviously economic benefits, potential extra lands, obviously challenges and impacts in waterways, but ultimately, is there any other alternative? So I think be careful what you wish for here, Councillor. Maybe a feasibility study covers your proposal from an investment pot, not from a ratepayer pot.
No, the whole point of this is that I'm not convinced that there is a shortage of water at this point in time. We haven't established that. So why would we spend $1.3 million looking for storage when we haven't satisfied ourselves that we need storage?
But this could satisfy that. That's what I'm saying. And it's just a provision there at the moment. We haven't pushed the button. Pre-feas work's been done, and the outcome of that was it is worth continuing down that path for feasibility, which includes all those things, as I say.
When's that scheduled
Telling me this
for?
is provision, not money to be spent.
Perhaps, Councillor, in page 4, the first part of the draft annual plan, it says this in regard to the Ngātaroro water scheme. It is proposed that in the 2014-15 year, an initial on-farm economic assessment of the storage option be completed prior to committing to a full feasibility study, also potentially programmed to commence in the 2014-15 year. So there's still some work to be completed around that initial sort of pre-feasibility stuff, and then that would come back to you prior to any commitment to a full feasibility. This is really just making provision. It's not just, it is making provision in the plan for that. If you press the go button.
What's the funding source?
The investment account, yeah.
Council investment.
Yeah.
Oh, HBRC investment, beg your pardon.
Well, it'll be
Council.
Council investment.
it's council investments. It would be an advanced HBRC if HBRC carry it out.
Thank you, Councillor Scott.
Can I ask for clarification around this? I'm not sure where this water is being currently found, but could I ask Mr Maxwell, are there any takes upstream of Marae Kākaho?
Yes, there are. There's a number of them.
And did they go on to bans in the drought?
Yeah, there was pretty much the whole catchment was out. Those guys were affected pretty early on. Most of them were tied to higher flows.
So let's get back to the annual plan. Are there any other questions around the staff comments there? Considerations? Someone happy to take us to the recommendation then? Have you got a recommendation? Outline who it involved. Okay, sure. So someone happy to move this when we get it? Happy to move, Councillor Dick. Thank you. We have a seconder in that.
I'm quite happy to recommend to
Second.
that very bold statement.
You are happy to second that? Okay. Speakers? No further speakers. I'll put that motion then. All those in favour, please say aye. To the contrary, no. Now, the Tim Gilbertson section